Broadly defined, AI may be regarded as powerful algorithms, machines, or computer systems that have over time developed human-like capabilities through techniques such as machine learning, neural networks, logic programming, and fuzzy logic. Through these techniques, AI is trained, aided by big data, to be able to perform tasks that simulate human intelligence. These tasks include learning through experience, identifying patterns, reacting to questions, understanding languages, and solving specific problems. The use of AI has moved significantly to the era where new large-scale AI models, also recently classified as generative AI, such as ChatGPT, are being released every month. To explain this point, I'll just simply refer us to our mobile phone. You know, there's a lot of unseen hands, I should say, if I choose the word, that are controlling things that happen in your mobile phone. Just for once, just have in mind the picture of what happens when you do a search on Google, maybe on your mobile phone or your laptop, or maybe you try to search for traveling. Maybe you want to travel to a country and you search for flight booking. The next thing you see subsequently is that adverts of flight bookings start popping up either in your email or now these are done by online bots that are powered by artificial intelligence. So just for time sake, I'll just want us to have that example in mind. So that tells us, simply what gives us an idea of what AI is about generally. Now, it is becoming increasingly difficult to consider human flourishing without considering the impact of AI in all spheres of human endeavor, especially in Africa. Indeed, the rapid rise in the development and deployment of AI in multiple settings raise interesting legal challenges. Now, from a legal standpoint, the primary challenge of AI is how best to regulate AI in order to mitigate its harm, be it real or merely feared, relating to its development and use. There is also the challenge of formulating appropriate regulation regime that will ensure the actual and expected benefits of AI are harnessed for human and societal development in Africa. The development and deployment of AI technologies in Africa continue to impact key sectors of the African society, such as employment and labor relations, which obviously is the theme of today's webinar, such as agriculture and food security, energy and mining, environmental protection and climate change, governance, democracy and the rule of law, legal processes, business and ethics, gender equality, human rights, digital credit, data protection, intellectual property, education, as well as indigenous knowledge curation. Indeed, AI remains among the top 5 most disruptive technology, and its deployment, its use, can produce negative outcomes, as well as raise accountability and ethical questions about its use in the African context. Specifically, the use of AI technology can promote gender and racial biases. It can promote misinformation, it can promote fake news and hate speech, and arbitrary digital content takedowns, among others. Furthermore, the use of AI can promote and deepen social, political, and economic inequalities, especially in relation to persons with disabilities, the elderly, children, and women, and further widen the digital divide. More specifically, the deployment of AI technology can foster human rights abuses in relation to the right to freedom of expression, access to information, and the right to privacy, and potentially raise serious concerns about data privacy and security and cross-border data flows. There are also fears that AI technology will impact labor by taking over jobs, requiring human intelligence. Now, this webinar today would determine whether these fears are actually real or they are just, mere, theoretical. Nonetheless, AI technology offers enormous opportunities for Africa, including in the area of wealth creation, and the technology can be deployed to tackle some of the major challenges that Africa faces in key sectors already identified above. Global investment in AI technology and its market continue to show great potential for growth. From existing reports, the global AI investment in 2022 was $19.9 billion US dollars, and this is anticipated to grow to about 500 billion US dollars this year. And further, it is further predicted to record about 15.7 trillion US dollars in investment by 2030. Countries in the global north, especially North America and China, with huge investment in AI-related R&D, deployment and acquisition, continue to dominate the market. This is evidenced by the huge presence and investments of the global north and Chinese tech giants such as Google, X, formerly known as Twitter, IBM, Microsoft, Baidu, Facebook, among others in Africa. Africa is, however, making some modest strides in AI investment and R&D to bridge the AI divide. For instance, about over 149 emerging AI hotspots, the majority of which are in the academia, have been identified in Africa, while slightly over 10% of the 6,500 technology startups in Africa plied their trade within the context of the fourth industrial revolution, including AI technology. Recently, the Nigerian government launched Africa's first AI-powered humanoid robot named Omeife. Also, the AI sector in Africa received about 17.5 million US dollars in government and private sector investments in 2019, and this continues to grow. Investment in the AI sector in Africa is bound to grow bigger with the increasing awareness on the part of governments and the partnerships being built with big tech corporations and countries from the global north. Indeed, national and regional governments are already taking initiatives to develop legal frameworks aimed at seizing the opportunities and tackling the challenges of AI, which were already in Africa, which I've already highlighted. At the moment, these initiatives are in the form of policy formulations, official studies, public consultations, and dialogues. For instance, countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Rwanda, Egypt, Benin Republic, Republic of Congo have developed broad or specific policies and strategies on AI. And they've also established centers for AI studies or set up dedicated agencies to drive AI development. In addition, Egypt has developed a charter to guide the development and use of AI technology. Expectedly, this charter will evolve into a law or a regulation. At the regional level, there is the African Digital Transformation Strategy adopted in February 2020, which recognized and acknowledged the significance of harnessing the benefits of emerging technologies, including AI, for the development of the continent's digital economy. Also, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights adopted a resolution in 2021 by which it called for a study on AI and human and people's rights in Africa. This was followed by NEPAD's African Panel on Emerging Technologies, APET, which produced a study, and the study concluded, among other things, that the deployment of AI technology supported by appropriate and progressive legal policy and ethical frameworks can significantly contribute to the economic growth and development of Africa. Now, based on these reports by APET, the expert consultative meetings are already being conveyed since 2022. And I can say that that expert committee has set up, has produced a continental AI strategy in Africa. And I'm aware that the strategy would be released sometime next week if all things remain equal. Now, overall, to be effective, the foregoing initiatives must lead to a national and regional AI legal regimes that are homegrown and responsive to the peculiar needs of the African continent. So the point I'm trying to make here is that African policy and legal makers must, as much as possible, avoid the Brussels effect. We all know that the EU has recently adopted an AI Act. And so there's a tendency for other parts of the world, especially Africa, to just copy and paste what has been done there to impose or to apply in the African context. But what I'm saying is that a law that is developed for the regulation, whether nationally or regionally, for AI regulation must be homegrown and must be developed based on the realities of the African continent. And that is the major message that we are driving in the book, that the edited book volume on artificial intelligence and the law in Africa. Now, such framework must be flexible and balanced to allow room for development of the technology. The framework must be developed through an open, consultative, and transparent process, and tailored with cautious optimism to suit the lived experiences of Africans, address the challenges faced by Africans, and achieve the developmental priorities of the continent as articulated in the African Union Agenda 2063. Thank you for listening. I hope I didn't use up most of the time. Georgina?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Desmond. No, yes, you used your time very wisely, and then you also imparted knowledge with respect to what's going on in Africa or on artificial intelligence. Thank you very much for that presentation. If you have any question for Dr. Desmond, please drop it in the chat box, and we can also take it up at the end of the presentation. At this juncture, I would like to introduce Janine post Dr. Desmond's presentation. So Dr. Janine Berg will be speaking to us on artificial intelligence and the law in the world of work. Picking up from where Dr. Desmond left off, what are the challenges in terms of job quantity and quality with respect to artificial intelligence? Welcome, Janine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really a great honor. So I'm probably the only non-lawyer of the group, so I won't really be speaking about the law. I will be talking about policy in general. But what I'm going to do really is present a study that I published with my co-authors back in August, which was an analysis of the potential effects of generative AI on jobs in the world. And so we have some data for Africa as well. So can everybody see my slides? I hope so.
Yes, we can see them.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'm just very quickly going to explain what we did so that everybody understands a little bit what we did without going too much into detail with the methodology. So don't get too intimidated by this slide here. But what we wanted to do was to do a global analysis of the potential effects of generative AI on employment. And a lot of the studies that have been done only on the United States, or they've been done on Europe, and they've been using the descriptions of jobs for those countries. So what we did instead was to use the descriptions of jobs set forth by the International Standard on the Classification of Occupations, which is part of the UN, part of the ILO. So we're the Secretariat for the International Conference on Labor Statisticians, and they developed this, what's called ISCO. And ISCO has different levels to it. So right here on the top, you would see the ISCO 1-digit full label, and there's basically 10 big groups. Within those groups, you have 2 digits, which gets into more detail with occupational titles, then 3 digits and 4 digits. So the 4-digit is the most detailed occupational titles, and there's 436 of these titles. And what the humans at the ILO have done is that within all of these job titles, they have a description of the tasks of what people do. So when you go to work every day, you don't just do a job, you basically do a compilation of tasks. And these tasks evolve over time. And we know that. In our own careers, if you look back, you can see how you kind of do different things. And of course, when new technology comes into play, that affects those tasks that you're doing. And so this is very much a task-based analysis to the work. So we looked at the 436 jobs and the tasks within those jobs, and there's a human description written by the ILO. And then what we did was we used ChatGPT-4. So I co-wrote this with two colleagues that are data scientists, and they were able to use the technology by sending basically the API version of the technology to ask ChatGPT first to give a description of the tasks, and then to give scores on the potential for automation with generative AI technology. So if you see here on the bottom, this is the example of primary school teachers. So that is the category 2341 at the 4-digit level. And one of the tasks would be preparing daily and longer term lesson plans in accordance with the curriculum guidelines. So what we did was have ChatGPT give us also a description, and we did a comparison to see if it was realistic, and it was, and then assign it a score for each of these tasks from 0 to 1 of what is the potential for this task to be automated. And then what we did, if you then have all the 436 occupations, and you look at them at the larger category at the 1-digit level, and you take all the tasks within those occupations, these are our scores for what are the possibilities, what is the potential exposure then of those tasks within those occupations to the technology. So right here you have the 9 of the main categories. We took out armed forces. And if you'll see here, what you see is that clerical support workers, 58% of their tasks, so for all clerical support workers, have a medium level exposure to the technology, whereas 24% have a high level of exposure. And then some of the other categories, technicians and associate professionals, service and sales workers, they're also exposed, but not nearly as exposed. And the tasks have a medium level of exposure. So that gives a sense a little bit about what are the potential risks of automation of these occupations. So let me just show it to you in a little bit more detail. So this is now at the 4-digit level. So if you see here on the left, managers, and let me just take the second line, retail and wholesale trade managers. So they have 10 tasks, because we standardize it for 10 tasks for each of the occupations. And then these are the scores of exposure. And you can see that within the big broad category of managers, most of the tasks have a low level of exposure. And low we're classifying as between 0 and 0.5. So you see that most of it is really around 0.2, 0.3. And there's a few tasks that have a much higher level exposure. And that makes sense, because if you think of a resale and wholesale trade manager, maybe some of the paperwork that they're doing could be automated with the technology. Maybe some of the scheduling of their staff could be automated by the technology. That's something that exists right now. But a lot of the other things they do, negotiating with clients, actually talking with the staff, all of that, it's very difficult to be done, or to be done well with technology. But then if you compare it to clerical support workers, you'll see that there, most of the tasks really lie to the right of the 0.5 line, so in that medium level exposure, or even in the high level exposure, which is the 0.75 line. So this is in essence what we did with the analysis. And then what we did was we took all of these scores for each of these 436 occupations, and we looked then at the employment numbers around the world. So at the ILO, we have our our ILO microdata repository, and it has the labor force surveys of about 140 countries. Not all of them are at the 4-digit level. There's about around 50 that are at the 4-digit level, and then we have some that are at the 3-digit level, some at the 2-digit level. We were able then to do a model, to do an estimate at the 4-digit level of what is the potential exposure. So let me start with the bottom panel, which is automation. So we basically have a cutoff on, depending on how high your score is for your occupation of being exposed to the technology, and also whether there's much dispersion in tasks. Which is what we're calling in statistics, the concept would be a standard deviation. So it means that you could maybe have some of your tasks that could be automated, but other tasks that couldn't be, such as in the example of the managers. Well, those people would more likely to have jobs that are augmented, which means that some of their tasks could be done by the technology, and then they have time to do other things because they've been relieved of that time. And so that's why it's augmented. But now if you have a whole bunch of your tasks that can be automated by the technology, then the likelihood of your job being automated is much higher. So here on the bottom panel are our results for what we estimate are the potential exposure to automation. And as you can see, for the world, it's 2.3%, which sounds very trivial, but it is 75 million jobs, but a much higher percentage in high-income countries, 5.1%. Now, this is because the economies are much more diversified. As countries get richer, their economies get much more diversified. So in lower income countries, you have many more people in agriculture, you have many more people in food vending, transport. These are jobs that wouldn't be affected by the technology. But if you think of a higher income country, you have a lot of people in finance and insurance and real estate, in entertainment. These are professions that would have higher exposure. And you have, of course, many more clerical support occupations. And it's really clerical support occupations that are driving this result. Because although the new generative AI technology is quite creative and can do these really amazing things as far as writing, I mean, I think we've all experimented with ChatGPT, on the whole, it's still hard for the technology to do some of, an everyday function, just like it's hard for a bot to give this talk today. So this is something that I do in my job that would be difficult to replace with the technology. And on the top panel, what we have are the augmentation numbers. So this is the percentage of jobs that we feel could be complemented by the technology. And here you see a much more equitable distribution between countries. So in low-income countries, 10.4% of employment likely to be augmented or has the potential to be augmented, whereas in high-income countries, it's 13.4%. Now, there's a couple caveats here. The first is that we're talking about exposure, and exposure is very different from actually putting this technology in place, because there's, of course, in many countries, particularly low-income countries, you have constraints. You don't have reliable infrastructure. Electricity might not be reliable. Bandwidth, broadband is not reliable, or it's expensive. And then maybe people don't have the digital skills, but also maybe it just doesn't make sense. This technology isn't always free. And maybe for the context that people are working in, it doesn't make sense for an organization to adopt it. So there's a lot of caveats here, and this is very, very much an upper threshold. It also doesn't account for new jobs that will be created. And we know that every time there's new technology, there's new occupations that exist. Nobody would have ever thought of having, a social media manager 20 years ago, and yet that's an occupation now. And now even with ChatGPT, you have titles such as prompt engineers that wouldn't have existed before. So it doesn't account for that. The other thing you might notice here is that the orange, so these are divided by sex, male and female, and orange is female and much more implicated. And that's because women are overrepresented in clerical support occupations. They also tend to be highly represented in associate professional and professional occupations, whereas they're not in construction, they're not in transport, or not very much. And as a result, and those are occupations that aren't going to be affected. Here's some data by region. So on the bottom here, we have Africa, very low numbers of potential exposure for automation. So total 3.3 million jobs. of course, these are people's livelihoods and we shouldn't trivialize it, but in relative terms, it's not much. And then the augmentation potential at around 10 to 11% in Africa. Okay, so first, there's caveats that I mentioned, and there's also a lot of policy issues that one needs to think about. So the first thing is, well, there are a lot of people who don't have access to the technology. There's people who don't have access to the internet, and here's data, and you can see that for the African continent, there's still many places in the world where people are not using the internet compared with other parts of the world. So that would be certainly something that would stymie the use of this technology in Africa. But then there's also a lot of policy issues with, if this does happen and there are job losses or there is augmentation, what needs to be done? So I know I don't have much time, but just quickly, I want to go through what some of these policy implications are, because I think it's something that we need to be paying attention to. The first thing is really about, for those people who might lose their jobs, that this is really much a collective responsibility, that this cannot be just on the shoulder of someone. And with, typically we hear, oh, they need to train or they need to increase their skills. Well, ironically, with this new technology, one of the jobs that is most affected is really computer programmers. Although we still need computer programmers, all of the large language models are really helpful for computer programming. So it's very hard for an individual to know what job to go into and to be in a job that's technology proof or recession proof or climate change proof or all of these, impending crises that are affecting the world of work. So we really do need to think of these things collectively as a responsibility. And one important thing is really about within an organization to prioritize redeployment and training. So if it's a very large telecommunications company that's integrating this technology, to what extent those people who might lose their jobs, can they be redeployed to other positions within the firm? So this is along the lines of our convention number 158 on the Employment Protection Convention. For those who might be let go, of course, then there's also collective responsibility to provide income support for people while they are retraining and to give them the skills that they need. And there, of course, are sectors of the economy that are crisis proof, such as the care economy. We know that there's shortages of care workers all over the world. Also in the green economy, we know that there's a lot of positions that are occupations that need to be filled. So to the extent that governments can be thinking about how to be investing in some of these jobs, that can be a good source of quality jobs, that this be done. And here, what I mean, especially with care, a lot of these jobs are undervalued, care sector, health sectors in most parts of the world are underfunded. So this is something that could be rectified so that these jobs can be good quality jobs. But then we also need to make sure that the new jobs that are created are of good quality. And here in particular, with respect to AI, we know that there's workers all over the world, particularly in Africa, but also in Asia and also in Latin America, that are training AI systems. So ChatGPT would not have come about without millions of trainers who verified the system and who will continue to do so. And this was true with the web and many other technologies. So the World Bank estimates that there's 150 million of these workers. These numbers are not verifiable, but it's a lot of people, and right now these jobs are not they're not really good quality jobs. Most of them, these workers are classified as independent contractors, and so they lack rights and benefits. And even for simple things like if they don't get paid, they don't have anybody to turn to because they're basically interacting with the system. So at the ILO in 2025, 2026, we will be having a standard-setting discussion on decent work in the platform economy, which hopefully will address some of these concerns. And then, of course, we need to be thinking about augmentation. So if we think about some people whose jobs will some of the tasks that they do will be automated and they have more time to do other tasks. Well, to what extent could this actually help lead maybe to a reduction in working hours? It's something that 100 years and we haven't really been able to reduce working hours. Or will the productivity gains from all of this be shared? And that's a real question. We know that with the experience of globalization, that those benefits were not shared, and that led to increasing inequality in many parts of the world. But there's also risks for job quality that we need to keep in mind. So if you think about the technology being integrated into work processes and augmenting augmenting people's work, well, this could be a very positive thing, but it could also be negative, especially if they need to interact more with the system, if it's that system that is increasing the speed and intensity of their work, if they lose autonomy and discretion, if they don't have a manager to turn to when things go wrong, and if overall there's just a greater worker surveillance. So these are things that really need to be considered, and have long been discussed with really all technological integration into the workplace. And here, to the extent that there can be some sort of participatory design when technology is integrated into the workplace, why is it being integrated? What is the purpose? And how can it be designed so that job quality improves rather than deteriorates? Of course, this is more easily done if workplaces are unionized, if workers have job security, if workers can voice their concerns. Without that, it's difficult to do, but that is certainly the best way forward. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janine. To contextualize and also put into numbers the inevitable fact that I may have to probably reposition myself when I was looking at the graph with respect to my profession. But at least the upside is that also you've shown us what some of the governments have been doing in terms of getting a workforce into the AI systems already ahead of the curve. I don't know where I'll find myself in a couple of years based on what AI and your predictions are, and a lot of us are within this call, but it's at least you put it into context, given us the numbers. And then I guess my question to you at the end of all of this, what else can we do with this looming, and how soon do we expect it based on what you've done in terms of research? Something for you to consider towards when we do Q&A. Again, please share any questions you may have for Janine. She'll still be on the call till the end with respect to what she's presented. Now we're going to go over to Dr. Debbie Collier, who will be presenting a chapter in her book with respect to AI in the African labor law context. It was made reference to by Dr. Desmond, and now we can let Debbie put it in her own words, what that means for us.
Thanks, Georgina. Can you see my screen?
I did, and then it disappeared, so I can see a line now. Now I can see it, yeah, and I can see it.
Can you see it? Okay, so let me
But now you could put it in presentation mode.
Sure.
Yes.
So much of what I am, is that complete?
I can note still with the side notes.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
You need to put it in the full screen with presentation mode.
It is, but it's because I've got two screens up, I think. Let me see if I can swap. No, now you're not seeing it properly. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better. Perfect. Now that's
okay,
good.
Great. Okay. So the book chapter which I authored for the book that Desmond spoke about is about labor law as a technology for humanizing work in the digital era. And it really picks up on a lot of the themes that Janine has spoken about, but unfortunately it also leaves us with the questions which Georgina posed at the end. So I'm just going to give you an overview of the book and what it looks into and raise some of the considerations. Important developments just in terms of what else can we do. Desmond spoke about the AU AI strategy. So I think we've also got to see this really very much from the multiple layers, regulatory layers that are involved. So obviously within the workplace, it's the collective bargaining space between trade unions and businesses, but there is the problem of declining trade union membership and of course the impact of AI on the ability of trade unions, both an opportunity to organize, but also threats and challenges. And then of course we move into a national space where regulatory instruments need to be designed in the national, in the sectoral context, and then of course in the regional. So looking at it from a SADC and other trading areas, and then of course the sorts of strategies and instruments that come out of the AU. So there are multiple layers to the question of what next and how do we regulate. So just in terms of what the chapter does, there really are 3 integrated inquiries, just looking at people and AI in the world of work in Africa. More broadly, the context for labor law in Africa. Who does it apply to? Janine put some of the stats up around the levels of informality and also the lack of connectivity. So these are all challenges that we face in terms of making best use of the opportunities. But the positive part, of course, is because we are still in various stages of industrial development, perhaps less people's jobs will be impacted. It's an opportunity to use both what the so-called industrial revolution, but also to bypass stages of industrialization on the continent. So let me just move ahead on my slide. Now I hope this works. Okay, so this is just looking at people AI. I've embellished a bit. Desmond is not here, fortunately, the editors. If we had a second edition, I think what I would bring on board in the chapter is the extent to which, and Janine also picked up on this, is the extent to which we also need to take into account environmental imperatives in the context of climate change. So the Industrial Revolution and the technological advances also give us an opportunity to really transition not only through technology, but to transition through our energy systems. So I'll bring that into this discussion, but it's actually not really woven. I mention it, but don't develop it in the chapter. So some specific characteristics about the world of work and communities in Africa and the environment. We have a demographic dividend. We've got a youthful population. So if you look at the sorts of statistics that those who economists and others who do age analysis, what is the impact going to be? We know that in many Western countries, there's an aging population. There's a decline in youth, which puts massive pressures on the labor market. And it's really the opposite structure in the African context. It's a growing population. We have increasing urbanization, and informal employment is the main source of employment. So this has implications, of course, for labor law and the reach of labor law. So industrialization processes differ from other regions in the world. This means that because we have high levels of informality, there's a limited scope and application of labor law principles. It's in the formal economy, in the workplaces that were traditionally unionized, that the reach and application of labor law applies, which is not the majority of workers in the African context. So already we need to start thinking about other ways of regulating active labor market policies, rather than sort of national principles in our labor law. So we have low and declining levels of trade union membership, even within the limited formal sectors that we have. So here, to bring the environment into the context, Africa's carbon emissions are actually, as a continent as a whole, we in South Africa, I think, are the offender on the continent, the biggest carbon emitter. But as a whole, Africa's carbon emissions are low in comparison with other continents. This is a benefit. Unfortunately, we are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, but we're not one of the large emitters. But as our population grows, as urbanization increases, our carbon emissions will increase. And already we've seen in the past few years multiple extreme weather events that have had significant impact on communities, which will impact the labor market. So in terms of the AI systems, I think Desmond has already mentioned some of these, Georgina as well. There are AI systems being deployed in multiple business activities, agriculture, drones for mining, applications in manufacturing and health, and applications in energy, finance, education, transportation, and public service delivery. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with the rise in gig economy employment, and the extent to which that is a form of employment, but not falling within the scope of traditional labor law protection. So as is happening in the rest of the world, new technologies are transforming the world of work with new forms of work and work arrangements emerging. In labor law terms, non-standard forms of work. But what differs on the African continent is, of course, is the extent to which most of employment in any event took place outside of formal employment. So the kind of forerunner to the strategy developments that are happening currently at the AU, this is covered in the book, is the extent to which the AU recognizes these transitions, and this is a technological transition. My argument is that we should couple the technological transition with our just energy transition and responses to climate change. So this is a transition that has implications. And the message from a labor law perspective, which is somewhat troubling, but it really means we need to reflect about what do the instruments look like, how do we regulate to ensure that labor standards are protected and decent work is achieved, because the idea being that we need to focus on work and move away from the idea of jobs in the traditional sense. So this is just a little bit of statistics around, and some of this has been covered, the extent to which the economy is informal, and in the past the narrative has been around how do we formalize. The ILO's recommendation 204 is all about seeking ways to transition from the informal to the formal, but there's increasingly a recognition that this is not necessarily the appropriate policy narrative that we should be having, because in reality, in most African context, informality is the norm. And so we need to think about what does that mean for labor law and the sort of traditional hierarchical national regulatory systems, which are slow. The law always lags behind technology. It takes years to move change through the traditional legal systems. So we need to think creatively and out of the box around how we regulate to promote fundamental labor standards and decent work. On the right, on the left-hand side there, this is just the extent to which is curious, the extent to which, so there's a coverage gap as well as a usage gap in terms of who is accessing and using technology. The good news is that there's been an increase in the extent to which connectivity is possible. So the coverage of connectivity has improved significantly over the past decade, but usage is not simultaneously improving. So it raises the critical question, why does the usage gap persist despite narrowing coverage gaps? In sub-Saharan Africa, awareness of mobile internet is growing, but has slowed in the past 5 years or so. And the situation is particularly pronounced. So there are significant cohorts that own a smartphone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually using it to access technologies. So the network is there, but people are not using it. And this is related to 4 things: affordability, but also local content. So making sure that technologies are servicing this is societies that they are located in, and cyber hygiene. So it's really about the significant need to which digital skills education is needed alongside how do we use these tools within our economy. It's just the sorts of basic digital literacy which is needed to bridge that digital divide. So 2 particularly important considerations in the African context is the nature of the economy and the nature of the digital divide. And so that kind of sets the scene for labor law. Where did it come from? How is it developed? Of course, the past is never in the past. So traditional roots of labor law in Africa link very much to Africa's colonial past. And it's a paradoxical tool, the extent to which labor law has been used and abused, but ultimately is also a tool that can promote workplace democracy and can provide a pathway to an alternative future. But its roots also do need to be interrogated in terms of whether this is the most appropriate articulation of standards in the context that we find ourselves in. So the industrialization processes and the development of legal systems on the continent have been influenced by colonial powers, and of course, which were involved in various forms of resource extraction on the continent. So the other paradox is the extent to which it's the resource extraction from the continent that has resulted in the sorts of global warming and climate change, yet Africa is not the largest emitter. So it's resources from the continent being exploited elsewhere, but creating greater disasters on the continent. And of course, as we transition into industrialization, we run the threat of making this worse. So in the modern context, there's a caution also, and this comes up around who's providing AI to the continent. It's predominantly, is it predominantly foreign digital apps, or are we creating local? So there's a concern about algorithmic colonization of Africa, which may echo colonization by neglecting local interests and disadvantaging minority groups. So some of that has come up. And Desmond also mentioned the extent to which AI can spread disinformation and threaten political stability, hence the need for regulating. I think he also mentioned the early movers to regulate, Egypt, Rwanda, and Mauritius. So lots of work to be done, of course, in terms of labor rights and our commitments. I think we have to have serious conversations at the various levels. How should these instruments develop? And most countries have the Decent Work Program with the ILO, which certainly is a more appropriate way in many contexts than going through national regulatory norms and law setting systems, which take a lot longer. So most African countries, of course, are bound by ILO standards. These are reiterated in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and there are various regional instruments that regulate labor relations. So these are the forums. And as Janine mentioned, in 2025, the ILO will be, we will get guidance from the ILO in terms of how we go ahead with regulating platform work. So we're not necessarily, a forerunner, but that's often not a bad thing. But what we should not be doing is simply transporting and making mistakes of the past, but interrogating with what developments are already happening. So some of these have already come up. What does labor law need to achieve if it is to be a technology for humanizing work? Well, firstly, the reach and boundaries of labor law need to be reconsidered. If 85% of the population in many African countries are in informal work, then labor law is ineffective in protecting the rights of all workers. So there's really a need to reflect on the instruments and how we achieve the fundamental purposes of labor law, which is to balance unequal power relations, but also increasingly recognize the need for labor law to contribute towards sustainable development standards. And this really is an opportunity, I think, for African countries to achieve not only a digital transformation and perhaps leapfrog over some stages of industrial development, and some of those stages would be particularly harmful to the environment, but to also use this as an opportunity for a just transition and to ensure that we retain a low carbon emission status in a way that is environmentally sustainable and leads to socioeconomic development. So I think a lot of this has come up. Labor law needs to respond to the potential displacement of jobs. Again, in an informal economy, we might be seeing, in fact, that jobs are access to work is growing through these different forms of work that are being introduced. Janine mentioned a lot of them, but we need to make sure that they are decent work, decent jobs. If we don't have traditional labor law systems that extend their boundaries to incorporate these new forms of work, then we need to think about the regulatory systems that should be put in place and instruments, and where and at what level, regional, national, or on the continent as a whole. Social dialogue, of course, is critical. One of the fundamental principles of of the ILO, but also the need to extend social protection to minimize the impact. So those active labor market policies become really important in addition to labor law protections. Privacy is a big issue. AI is all about the use of data. We all create data. Data is the new gold. And trade unions, to the extent that they are active, really should, right from the level of workplace, start developing. And there are numerous sets of global trade unions that have ethical AI principles for application in the workplace that need to be adopted. But some of the key concerns there are around how data is collected and used and getting access to that information. Technological decision-making, terminations can happen because of digital AI apps deciding, making decisions without an intermediary or a human intermediary. So procedural fairness, of course, one of our core principles of labor law becomes important there. And then also the potential for excessive surveillance and abusive supervision practices through technology need to be guarded against. AI augmented, it's been raised, gender bias in particular, race as well, and other vulnerable ethnic and social groups can experience augmented, and humans can discriminate. AI can do it a lot quicker. So these are all the fundamental concerns that we need to make sure that we regulate at all levels. And then, of course, workers' collective rights need to be addressed also at all levels. And I think, I'm sorry, I hope I haven't gone over time, but just
maybe a wrap up, Debbie.
Yeah,
maybe one more minute or so.
This is the wrap up, but really, and I think I've made this point, is that labor law, you know, to serve an important role of protecting rights, it is an opportunity to not only to regulate AI and technology, but also to take into account the broader context and global challenges. Problem in many African countries face is the sovereign debt crisis, which constrains governments' abilities to finance these appropriate interventions. So we really do need to think creatively as well. Many vulnerable communities have already felt the shock of climate change events. And so if we do pursue an environmental approach and comply with our emission targets, this does also open up opportunities for funding. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thanks, Georgina.
Thank you, Debbie, for highlighting specifically a lot of the gaps that we have in legislation. I feel a lot of countries are already grappling with AI is already here. How are we balancing AI and then what we're doing in terms of protections for the workforces that are there? And there are still quite a lot of gaps within the legislation. So I think that is something that we really can pick up even in the Q&A. If anybody has a question to Debbie in terms of what she has seen, her research on the legislative perspective, and then also what can we do more as a society to factor in some of these social and legal rights that we have to, that workers have in terms of protections as we also try to adapt to AI. So thank you, Debbie, for that. So the last speaker for today is Professor Rajendra Gunputh from Mauritius. And he will be giving us the perspective from the beautiful country of Mauritius with respect to some of the regulatory gaps that they have, case law and any reforms with respect to artificial intelligence, what they've been doing in that area. Welcome, Professor Rajendra. Professor Rajendra, can you hear us? Pamizai, do you have contact?
It's okay. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Good afternoon to excellent.
Okay,
good afternoon
fantastic.
Good afternoon to everybody. I was just lecturing. Let us present the situation in Mauritius. I have sent some slides. Maybe Dr. Bamu can share with you, if it is possible for that.
Thanks. Connor is sharing them now.
Excellent. Excellent. Therefore, I will make a short presentation. Time is running. I have been informed about that. um, about the potential of AI in artificial intelligence in terms of application and impact. Here, Mauritius, we are a member of SADC, COMESA, and the government is striving very hard to push AI forward. Because as we have seen, other speakers have already spoken about that, there are a lot of positive impact on the socio-economic development of Mauritius. I have 10 minutes in front of me. Please, Dr. Bamu, if you can. Okay, here we are. The structure of the presentation, I will speak very quickly about the new economies. You can catch up with the slides. And of course, if you need any additional information, you may also send me an email about that. Secondly, I will speak on the Mauritian artificial intelligence strategy in Mauritius. For us, Mauritian, there are emerging technologies. Of course, there are challenges of artificial intelligence. One colleague has spoken about work-life balances, a decent work, and some people in Mauritius, of course, they are afraid of AI, but according to me, there is no need to be afraid. We'll end up with a conclusion and some recommendations and a list of references on artificial intelligence. This being said, if we can move to the second slide, new economies for Mauritius, it is ocean economy, green, and the green economy, of course. We are again working a lot on the blue economy for its proper exploitation. We can use it and to have a lot of resources, provided we don't exploit the deep sea ocean. Therefore, there is a blue technology. All these new economies, the government of Mauritius are working very hard. For example, deep sea exploration, digital ocean towards artificial intelligence, traffic management operation using AI. Indeed, everywhere we are using AI now, without sometimes not knowing it properly. There are opportunities in the BPO sectors. We can, here in Mauritius, everything you have online for citizen services and government. Everything is made, for example, for your for payment, for your pay as you earn, for taxes. Everything is online. Everything has been prepared. Of course, we can use AI and drone to detect diseases, dangerous drugs, especially in Mauritius, small island, but people are cultivating a lot of dangerous drugs. It is also important for harvesting and agriculture to detect pests and other dangerous chemical products and predators. And of course, I have spoken on the ocean economy because we rely also a lot of tourism. With the development of artificial intelligence, we can exploit the deep sea ocean for pearls, sea plants, air conditioning, which may trigger not only billions, trillions of dollars. This being said, let us move to our second slide, please. Therefore, I have spoken there of potential of artificial intelligence in terms of applications and impact. We have labor requirements. Unfortunately, we don't have skilled workers in the field of AI. We saw COVID, which came to everywhere, including Mauritius, and we had to move to new technologies using Zoom and so forth and so forth. However, I will come back to that about the legal and regulatory framework, which are very, very weak in Mauritius. We are still relying. I don't say we don't have any law. I'm just saying these laws are very old. Colonial law we're still using. And some legislation have been passed by the Mauritian government on intellectual property right, industrial property rights, data protection right. But even that, we shall come up with relevant legislations on AI. AI also is important for energy saving through the use of AI in energy management and distribution. AI is also emerging, especially in key sectors in the socio-economic development, because Mauritius want to move from a developing countries to become a developed countries. We are relying on the tourism sector, And there are opportunities, more and more opportunities in the banking sector, the intelligent port and maritime Internet of Things, because Mauritius is well placed in the Indian Ocean. And of course, we are also working very hard on traffic management and security, ocean economy. This being said, if we can move now to our third slide about emerging technologies. We are working very hard to have internet banking here in Mauritius, just like some countries in Africa. Everything is online. You can pay online, Internet of Things, and we are working very hard. We have even programs at the university on blockchain and fintech, and MSc on blockchain and fintech. We have a lot of PhD students who are working on ICT and BPO. There are a lot of advantages which can bring down costs, reduce defect, and increase production speed. Health sector, as you can read, we have a lot of tourism. And here in Mauritius, we wanted to become a wellness centers and health reports. In the agricultural sector, with the development of AI and machine learning, both in productivity growth and in field technique. And of course, we can also do some effort in food and beverage industry. Please let us move to the next slide to save time. Thank you. Challenges of AI. As explained, people are afraid of loss of job because
Sorry for the interruption. You can proceed, Prof.
Yeah.
Professor Rajendra, can you hear us? Sorry, there was a slight interruption. You can proceed.
Yeah, thank you. Challenges of AI, as explained, some people are afraid of loss of job. They become redundant because of AI almost everywhere in Mauritius. But up to now, as explained, we have still workers who don't have sufficient knowledge in AI. It can improve our skill development and capacity building. Aggressive technologies like artificial intelligence, bot, or robotization to achieve organizational commitment, both in the public and private sector, spearheaded toward artificial intelligence. Digital transformation, computer literacy are the major challenges of artificial intelligence. Please let us shift to the next slide. Work-life balances. Of course, we have seen with COVID where a lot of people everywhere, even on the African continent, including Mauritius, where people were working at home. But we must cater for their rights in the workplace, social protection, and as explained, we have relevant legislation in place, Occupational Safety Health Act, the Workers' Rights Act, which is a new legislation, the Workmen Compensation Act, the Data Protection Act, and explain we must come up with new legislation on IPR. Work at home also has been beneficial to everybody to promote health and safety issues, to have more family relations. Please, let us move to the next slide. Conclusion and recommendation. Most literature review enhanced artificial intelligence. We'll come back to a list of references. However, as explained, there are strong lacuna for a strong and sustainable legal and regulatory framework because in Mauritius, not all, but most of our law are based on common law, English law, and legislation borrowed from England. There must be development in the IPRs and intellectual property rights and industrial property rights shall be revisited because they don't cater for new technologies to implement AI to boost, of course, the economy of Mauritius. In all the key sectors I have mentioned, tourism sector, there is also a strong need. The government is working on a technology park to bring all private public partnership together, experts, scientists, academic researchers, and institutions to collaborate together. Therefore, in Mauritius, we are very positive as usual. The government also is very positive. They are working group working on AI, and as explained, it is not a new subject, but we are programmed specialized to have more skilled workers on AI, fintech, etc., etc. So my last slide will be on some references where literature review is very positive about the future of work in the digital age. I have listed the most important articles, books I have gone through, and there are so many students also under my supervision who are working on fintech, blockchain, and artificial intelligence. Please, the next slide, which continued. Here we are. And finally, I got only 10 minutes. I repeat, you can contact me to have more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajendra. You used your 10 minutes very well, and thank you for honoring us this afternoon and keeping it short and sweet. But I think the uptake from what you've just said is basically, as much as yes, we've noticed some gaps in terms of legislative and regulatory provisions with respect to AI, we're still using and piecing together what legislation we have to give the requisite protections to the workers. And I think that was highlighted very well. And also you took us through what in terms of the impact of AI has been to Mauritius. And then hopefully we can also get more examples on that end. At this juncture, just before we go and deep dive into the Q&A session, and to give you also an opportunity to raise any questions that you have for the panelists, I'd like Claire to just present on the African Labour Law Society. Claire, if you may.
Hi, sorry to interrupt quickly. I'm back again just to give a short apology. We did not announce that we co-hosted this webinar with the Employment and Labor Lawyers Association of Nigeria, which is the new partner or affiliate or chapter in Nigeria of the African Labour Law Society. This is the first time we're doing a collaboration like this. So my apologies for forgetting that, but our president, Jamiu Akolade, is here and he will do the closing and just say one word or two about the association. Thank you. Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Pammy, and thanks, Georgie. Thanks everybody for staying on for this part of the afternoon, and it is a great honor for the African Labour Law Society to be co-hosting with Ilan and to bring this to our members and stakeholders. Just a reminder that membership of the African Labour Law Society is only $30 for 12 months, so it's very affordable, and we encourage you, if you're not a member, to become a member as soon as possible. And you can do that by visiting our website or emailing me. And I asked Connor to put my email address into the chat. Just an update on the various chapters that we have around the continent. The Lesotho chapter was our first one to kick off, and Rita Bealey is on the call, and she is very active, and we are grateful to her, as we are with our Botswana chapter, Kenya chapter, Mauritius chapter about to take off, the Zimbabwe chapter well on their way to being launched, and as Pammy highlighted, our recent partnership with Ilan. The conference this year, this is our 6th conference that we are running. We're very proud of our conferences and the content that is contained therein, and the thought leadership that is generated from all of the discussions will be held in Johannesburg. We haven't had a conference in Johannesburg yet, so we decided we would have it so that it's accessible, it's a little bit easier with flights, a bit more affordable for our African delegations and our and for visa purposes, etc. So there's a lot of accommodation around the venue, which is the Indaba. And as you know, the theme is around the fireplace discussing African labour law. So it'll be just at the end of the South African winter, and we will have fires and lots of discussions and trying to have less PowerPoint presentations and more discussion topics and pop-ups and panels. And really, we're very grateful to the over 30 people who have answered the call for speakers, and the program will be finalized by early April. So watch the space, and if you have any questions about the society, please reach out to me And we're very grateful to you all for being here this afternoon. Thank you,
Yeah,
George.
thank you, Claire. Thank you very much, and hope to see a lot of you in South Africa in August for the conference. Now, in terms of Q&A, we do have a question in the chat. I'll just summarize it. The question is from Pumelele Dlamini, and basically she's asking that AI is definitely here. It has its advantages and its challenges. And she's made reference to certain mining companies that are already using bots to drill and blast rocks underground. They no longer send miners to do that. So the bots do that, and they're controlled underground by skilled workers. This is a commendable for a labor law perfectionist perspective. But her question is, what happens to those semi-skilled miners who now have been replaced by these bots? How does Labor Relations Act protect these miners? I think I'll give this from a legal perspective, I'll throw this to Debbie. And then from a practical statistical perspective, I'll also give Janine an opportunity to respond to that based on what you've seen. If you could just give brief 1-minute responses on that, that would be great. Debbie and Janine.
Thanks, Georgina. Yeah, hi, Pumi. So indeed, the Labour Relations Act would have required a consultation process, either the redeployment, reskilling, or unfortunately the retrenchment of the affected workers. But it would have had to be through a facilitated process if there were more than 50 workers. Mines also have social and labour plans to deal with massive transitions. I hope I stuck to my time, Georgina.
Yes, you did it in 20 seconds. Thanks. Thanks, Debbie. Janine?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a perfect example of how this is a collective responsibility. So those miners were doing difficult work and now they've been replaced. Ideally, they should have been trained to be the higher skilled miners that are controlling the equipment. That would have been the ideal scenario. So to the extent that the company can retrain them into other occupations, that's ideal. Otherwise, supporting them in transitioning to other jobs, really providing income support and training. You had a question for me about lawyers, and you were worried about our job.
Yeah, I'm worried about myself and many others on this call.
I was actually invited to speak at a labor law conference a group of labor lawyers in Spain last week. Can you see this slide?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can.
So this is the 4-digit occupations for legal professionals. So just so you can see the data. So legal secretaries, highly exposed. And I think this is really a trend from what's happening for the past 15 years. Administrative assistants in general, the numbers are being reduced. If you look at the time series, it's being reduced, and you can see they're highly exposed. So that's definitely a profession that's dying out. The paralegals, some of their tasks definitely, but not all of them. And if you see the lawyers and the judges, they're pretty safe. I mean, I think a lot of what lawyers do is dealing with clients, and it's very difficult to replace that technology. So I wouldn't worry too much about your job.
Yeah. And then picking up on what you've just said in terms of replacing that technology, as much as professionals are quite high in terms of when you gave the initial numbers, there are certain professionals, for example, I'll pull away from lawyer because I've given that example too much. Like say doctors, but then now you've got apps, platforms that you can go on, key in some of the symptoms that you have, and then it can tell you probably what you have, and even to a certain extent tell you what you can take for that. But then the negative side of that is that this AI or bot is telling you what you have according to their diagnosis, telling you to prescribing medicine, but ultimately you've not seen anybody physically, and the downside is you could actually die based on what's happening. So to a certain extent, yes, they help, but how far are we taking use of technology away from actually seeing a qualified professional? I'll give that to both you and also Professor Rajendra from both a social and legal perspective.
Yeah, so I worry about moving into a world where some people are only going to be interacting with bots and some people will be interacting with humans. It's the richer people who will be interacting with humans, and that would be a very unjust outcome. So I would hope that the situation would be with doctors that they're going to be using the technology to speed up and to help them with the types of work that are taking up their time so that they have more time for patients. That's the ideal outcome, and it probably needs legislation to happen, because otherwise we have the risk of moving into this kind of two-tiered world. I'll stop there.
Okay. Professor Rajendra, any comments on that? Just the discussion we're having in terms of replacement of professionals?
No particular comment. no particular comment, but on the motion side, we are moving fast. If you come to Mauritius, you will see that AI is almost everywhere. But as I explained, we have lacunas on law relating directly to AI. I don't know the situation in Africa, but I hope we'll come with legislation on that issue. Thank you.
Okay. And then just moving to the Q&A, I don't see anything here. My last question is with respect to the gig economy and then a movement of a lot of companies into Africa to get some of these semi-skilled workers in terms of working for them within the AI system and processes. Yes, it's good, especially when you shift to getting a work within the systems, but then there are limited protections. And I think both Janine and Debbie, you highlighted some of them in the sense that I'm just a contracted worker. I wouldn't get maybe, let's say, any health benefit, pension benefits. I'm not an employee. What do you see in terms of the long term from a social perspective for that?
Should I take this or should it be Debbie?
Okay, we'll start with Debbie first, then you can take it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was actually going to throw it back to Janine because I think from a legal and a regulatory perspective, you know, I think this is a significant inquiry that's taking place globally under the auspices of the ILO and the idea of 2025. Janine, I don't know if that's looking at taking the form of a recommendation or
Hasn't been decided yet.
Yeah, so you know, the thing is, it is allowing more people to transition into, admittedly, an informal, it's still informal work, it's non-standard work, but it's allowing people who haven't had access to formal employment. So it's a bit of a stepping stone. You don't want to lose the potential value. I also think a lot of the inquiry from a legal perspective is around, you know, we have this fixation on everybody being an employee, and we try and find a way to have a gateway into these rights. I think we need to, and I imagine is what the ILO will do, will give us a new set of standards about how we regulate for decent work in these sectors. But yeah, back to Janine.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Debbie. I mean, because this whole binary, in some ways it works very well, in some ways it doesn't work. Now, we don't want to be inventing new categories necessarily that might just cause more confusion, but at least you need to be extending some sort of protections and rights to people who aren't in a traditional employment relationship. And you see that with occupational safety and health. You see it with some anti-discrimination law. So maybe that could be extended into other realms of labor law. But it's certain that if somebody's working on these platforms, they need to have some rights and benefits. And I think most importantly, they need to have the opportunity to interact with a human and not just a system. I think that's really the most alienating part of the work.
Okay, thank you both Debbie, Janine, and Professor Rajendra for your contributions this afternoon, and for all who've been on the platform, thank you very much. At this juncture, I'll pass it over back to Pamizai for a closing by Ellen.
I'll just hand over to President Jamiu to quickly draw a conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, Doc from Nigeria. I wasn't sure whether you'll be introducing me to close or whether I should just jump in. Good afternoon, everyone, and or good morning, whichever part of the world you are. It's afternoon here in Nigeria. My name is Jamiu Akolade, and I'm the founder and one of the trustees of the Employment and Labor Lawyers Association of Nigeria. We're happy to have co-hosted this beautiful webinar together with our African brothers and sisters at the African Labor Law Society. This is not a marketing slot for ELAN, but I'll just say one or two things about ELAN. ELAN also started in 2015, like the ALLS, with the same objective of gathering professionals with interest in labor and employment law in Nigeria. And part of our ambition has seen us extend our hands across the continent to ALS to see how we can further the interest and expertise in labor and employment law on the continent. We have over 120 members. We have an extension, a junior, an academy, if you call it, in our universities. So we have about 5 labor law clubs across Nigerian universities. And we basically do all this capacity development activities and programs. And that is why we've collaborated with ALLS on this webinar. We thank our speakers for creating time to deliver this enlightening session. We thank our moderator, Georgina, for the beautiful anchoring, and everyone who has had a role to play in putting this together. We believe that we will all go away learning one or two things from the webinar, and hopefully we'll be able to put it to good use, advising our clients and in our own jobs. I also need to start thinking seriously if AI would not steal my job and what I should be doing to avoid that. So thank you all for attending, and we hope you have the best of the rest of your day. Thank you. Back to you, President.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. We've come to a close of our webinar, and we hope you have a pleasant evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good evening. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. Bye-bye.